When Robert Baratheon staggered onto the Iron Throne, wine still staining his lips and victory still fresh in his voice, the realm held its breath. The rebel king, the usurper, as some still whispered, was never meant to rule. He was meant to conquer, to charge into glory, to swing his warhammer and make men kneel. But rule he must, and in those early days, a single choice changed everything. Instead of riding to Winterfell to beg his old friend Eddard Stark to serve as hand, Robert turned to the man who had given him the kingdom on a golden platter, Tywin Lannister. It was Cersei who suggested it first, her voice silky and poised. "My father is already here, Your Grace, and who better to keep the realm from crumbling than the richest and most powerful man in it?" She knew exactly how to flatter Robert's pride, how to let him believe the idea was his own. And Tywin? He stood silent as he always did, letting Robert speak himself into agreement. So it was done. Within a fortnight, Lord Tywin Lannister was declared Hand of the King. The small council bent to his will almost immediately. Grand Maester Pycelle, long a toady of House Lannister, sang his praises. Peter Baelish smiled as always, but grew quiet around him. Varys listened more and said less, and Sir Barristan Selmy, noble and old, watched Tywin with guarded eyes. The first thing Tywin did was dismiss the rot. The old master of ships and the drunk master of laws were replaced by men loyal to Lannister interests. Gold flowed from Casterly Rock into King's Landing, not as a gift, but as investment. The crown's debt to House Lannister ballooned, but the city ran smoothly. Crime was punished swiftly, and the treasury, at least on paper, was full. Robert. He hunted, he drank, he took whores to bed while Tywin signed the decrees. The king grew fat on wine and applause. His rage cooled, his passion dulled. In truth, Robert became a figurehead with a crown. A roaring lion stalked behind the Iron Stag's shadow. Eddard Stark never left the north. Letters passed between the king and his old friend, but Tywin made sure they remained cordial and distant. "Let the wolf sleep in his den," he advised. "We need no Stark meddling in the affairs of court." But even as Tywin ruled with cold precision, cracks spread behind the walls of Red Keep. Cersei hated her father, but she feared him more. He controlled her every move. Her affair with Jaime continued in secret, but it was harder now. Tywin's eyes were everywhere. She could not manipulate Robert as she'd planned, not with her father monitoring every coin, every word, every bedchamber guard. Jaime, restless in his Kingsguard white, chafed under Tywin's quiet contempt. "You are my son," Tywin would remind him, "but you are no heir." And the Lion of Lannister wanted legacy, not just titles and gold, but power passed through blood. His eyes turned to Tyrion, not out of love, but utility. Tyrion for once was not sent away. Tywin kept him close, using his clever tongue and sharper mind to counter Littlefinger's ambition and Varys's riddles. Tyrion played the game well, but he knew the rules were rigged, and the dealer wanted him dead if he lost. Then came whispers. From the east, Viserys Targaryen had married his sister Daenerys to a Dothraki warlord. Tywin received the news without emotion. "They are children playing at kings," he said. "Let them ride horses, they are no threat." But Varys raised an eyebrow, and Robert, drunk as he was, roared that he wanted them dead. Tywin calmly dismissed the idea of assassins. Why stir a nest of flies across the world? But he took quiet steps. Gold crossed the narrow sea, spies moved, assurances were made. And in the north, Eddard Stark felt the cold more keenly. Ravens brought tales of southern corruption, of gold cloaking power, of a king gone soft, and a hand growing fat off the realm. Ned worried for his children, for the realm. But he stayed put. Honor chained him, and Tywin knew it. Yet not all chains hold forever. The realm watched, and the game began. The year wore on, and Tywin Lannister's grip on the realm tightened like a velvet noose. King's Landing flourished under the surface. Markets bustled, the city watch swelled with gold-cloaked recruits, and the nobles toasted the peace that followed war. But beneath the gilded calm, fear festered. The small council had stopped advising long ago. They listened. Tywin didn't bark commands. He stated facts. When he spoke, it was final. And Robert, too drunk and too weary to care, allowed it. He hunted when he pleased. He stumbled from one brothel to the next. He laughed too loudly at empty jokes. The king had become a relic, half forgotten, half feared, and wholly useless. Still, Robert clung to his throne because Tywin allowed it, but Tywin's patience had limits. The first real test came when Robert insisted on naming his eldest bastard, Maya Stone, a lady of court. "She's strong," Robert slurred, "like her mother. She deserves some station gods, damn it." The court froze. Cersei's eyes burned with quiet fury, and Tywin's face was a mask of iron. Later that night, in the privacy of the Tower of the Hand, Tywin spoke bluntly. "A king may have bastards. He may whore. He may drink. He may even rage. But he may not legitimize his filth, not unless he wants a war in every great house that ever bent the knee." Robert smashed a goblet against the wall, but the old lion did not flinch. "You rule as long as I allow it, Robert," Tywin said, voice like dry bone. "You are king, yes, but I am the realm." That night, Maya Stone's invitation to court was quietly rescinded. The girl never knew how close she came to being another pawn crushed by Lannister pride. But the North was stirring. Eddard Stark sent another raven, his words thick with concern. "I've heard rumors, Robert, whispers of gold ruling where honor should stand. I beg you, come north, see Winterfell, remember who you are." Tywin read the letter before the king did. He intercepted all things now, filtering Robert's world like a father with a dull-witted child. He sent a reply in Robert's name, polite and dismissive. Ned would never know it wasn't his friend who wrote it, but someone else knew, Jon Arryn. The old hand, though pushed aside, still lived quietly in the Vale. He had withdrawn from court with his young son Robin, but he watched, and he listened. Jon had once mentored Ned Stark and Robert both. He knew the cracks that ran through the kingdom. And when word of Cersei's closeness to Jaime Lannister reached his ears, quiet whispers of children with golden hair and no trace of Baratheon black, Jon began to dig, and Tywin found out. One moonless night, the ravens flew again. This time to the Eyrie with poisoned ink and golden bribes, but Jon Arryn was too cautious. He told no one of what he had learned, not even his wife, Lisa, who had grown paranoid and reclusive. Instead, he sent a raven to the north, to Eddard, but that raven never reached Winterfell. Tywin's spies were swift. The letter was burned before it passed the neck. Its contents, whatever secrets Jon had discovered, vanished in ash. 2 weeks later, Jon Arryn fell ill. He lingered for days, raving with fever. Maesters could not save him. His final words, according to his wife, were maddened. "The seed is strong." And then he died. The realm mourned, but not loudly. He had been old, frail, a relic like Robert. Lysa fled to the Eyrie with her boy and slammed shut the gates. She trusted no one now. She sent no reply to the crown's demands. Her silence spoke volumes. Tywin sat at council, hands folded, already replacing Jon's seat before the tears dried. "We must maintain order," he said calmly, "and we must watch the north." In Winterfell, Ned Stark received no word of Jon's death. The north remained blind for now, but across the narrow sea Daenerys Targaryen quickened with child. A Khalasar gathered under the wings of prophecy and ambition. And in the Red Keep, Cersei stood before a mirror, stroking her stomach. She too was with child, but she already knew the father. The news of Jon Arryn's death finally reached Winterfell after nearly a month of silence. Eddard Stark stood in the Godswood, the letter from the crown in his hand, reading and rereading. The formal lines. It was cold, clinical, signed with Robert's name, but the language was too neat, too polished. It didn't sound like his old friend at all. "Jon is dead," Ned told Catelyn as they stood beside the heart tree. "They say it was sickness, sudden but natural." Catelyn's brow furrowed. "Lysa doesn't send word, not even a raven?" "Nothing." He looked to the snow-dusted sky. "And Jon was never a weak man, not one to be taken by a cough." Still, there was no call to the capital, no invitation for Ned to come south, no plea for help, no King's Road journey. Tywin didn't want him near the court, and Robert, whether by ignorance or apathy, made no move to ask for his oldest and truest friend. The north remained untouched, and that perhaps was Tywin's design, but it did not remain quiet. The bastard of Winterfell, Jon Snow, heard whispers in the great hall. Maester Luwin often talked to the ravens, frowning at how many messages were being intercepted or delayed. Something unnatural was happening with the communication across the realm. The Vale was silent. King's Landing only sent formal commands, no casual letters, no friendly signs of life. Even the Riverlands had grown reserved. "Something is wrong," Jon said once to Robb Stark as they trained. "There's a coldness deeper than snow, it's in the air." Robb nodded but said nothing. He was beginning to feel the weight of the North and what came with it. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tywin moved pieces with masterful precision. He arranged for Catelyn's sister, Lysa, to be labelled unwell in the capital's courts. A grieving widow prone to delusions. The Maesters at court began to question her mental state. Whispered rumours of hysteria spread subtly, planted by Pycelle and Baelish. Cersei, under her father's thumb, remained silent. But inside she fumed. Tywin allowed her no say in her own household. He hand-picked her handmaids, controlled her finances, even her movements. Her relationship with Jaime had grown strained. He warned her often now, "We cannot risk discovery. Not when father watches." Every corridor. Cersei, however, was not the type to be caged, and she had always known how to use secrets as weapons. She waited, she calculated, and when she confirmed she was pregnant again, with another child who bore not a trace of Baratheon black, she knew she had a choice to make. She could smother the truth as always, or she could turn it into power. Meanwhile, Tyrion Lannister wandered the capital, listening more than speaking. He drank with guards, gambled with lowborn knights, and heard whispers even Varys missed. He heard tales of Tywin's bribes reaching Essos, of Dothraki ships being sighted along Slaver's Bay, of Targaryens gathering friends again, slowly but surely. He said nothing to his father, but he drank a little deeper each night. Tyrion was not loyal, at least not blindly. He loved his house, yes, but he saw it for what it was, a towering monument to arrogance and cruelty. And if it were ever to fall, it would be because it stood too tall for too long. In the Reach, Mace Tyrell grew resentful of the Lannister hold on power. He had offered his daughter Margaery for a match before, and been rejected. Cersei had seen to that. Now, with Tywin running the kingdom like a golden tyrant, Mace began to speak of balancing power. The Vale, the Reach, and the Riverlands, houses, that had once been passive, all began to sense the same thing. Tywin Lannister did not want to govern the realm. He wanted to own it. And across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen gave birth beneath the moonlight. Her cries echoed across the Dothraki camp, and the blood of her pain stained the soil. The midwives whispered old words, and a red star burned above them in the sky. She named him Rhaego. Her dragon prince had come into the world. And in a black tower in King's Landing, Varys stood before the fire, watching the flames dance, his eyes heavy. "The game has changed," he murmured. The spider had begun to spin his web anew. Storms gathered over Westeros, though the skies remained clear. It wasn't wind or rain that threatened to flood the realm. It was quiet schemes, whispered. Loyalties and knives tucked beneath smiling cloaks. And as ever, Tywin Lannister sat at the center of it all, unmoved, calculating, and terrifyingly still. The Red Keep was more fortress than palace now. Guards doubled at the gates. Scribes worked late into the night. Decrees flew like crows, some public, some hidden behind layers of forged wax and false signatures. Those who spoke against the hand of the king were quickly labelled unsettled or traitors. A few vanished altogether. Robert Baratheon hardly noticed. He spent most of his time at the hunt, often gone for days, sometimes weeks. His men whispered about his increasing recklessness. Once he charged a boar alone while half drunk and came back, bloodied and laughing. "The gods can't kill me, I'm the bloody king," he shouted as his men stitched his thighs shut. But it wasn't gods Robert needed to fear. It was his queen. It was his hand. It was the rot that had taken hold inside the very throne room he'd conquered with fire and steel. Tywin watched the king's descent with cold interest. The more Robert drank, the easier it was to rule in his stead. But even Tywin knew, no reign lasts forever, and a corpse on a throne can only hold a kingdom. So long. He began preparations for contingency. If Robert died, the realm needed stability. His grandson, Joffrey, barely more than a cruel little prince with a liar's mouth, was the clear heir. And if anyone questioned the legitimacy, Tywin would have their tongues before the words left their lips. But not everyone bowed so easily. Renly Baratheon, Robert's youngest brother, had grown more popular than expected. Young, charismatic and shrewd, he had started forming quiet alliances. The Reach whispered his name with favor. The Stormlands still remembered his blood, and, while Stannis brooded on Dragonstone, too stern to sway lords with anything but fear, Renly charmed his way into relevance. Tywin noticed. He sent gold cloaks to monitor Renly's movements, but the boy was careful, dangerously so. Meanwhile, Cersei made her decision. She would keep the child. Another son, she suspected. And if Robert died, if Joffrey was king and Tommen next in line, her legacy would be sealed, but she would no longer bow to her father's will. She began reaching out in secret. Quiet meetings with Baelish, private conversations with Pycelle. She whispered concerns about Tywin's overreach, about his health, about the future of the kingdom without its true king. She was planting seeds. Some laughed, some listened. A few leaned in. And then fate moved faster than anyone expected. A raven came from the Stormlands. Lord Renly requested an audience with the king. A grand feast, a reunion of Baratheon blood. Robert agreed without thought. "Let my brother pour me a cup for once," he slurred. Tywin tried to object. The realm cannot afford distractions. But Robert roared him down. "No more talk. Serve war and coin and plots, Tywin. I want a feast, I want laughter, I want life." So a feast was held in Storm's End, grand, gaudy, and overflowing with gold and tension. Renly played the perfect host. He toasted his brother. He flattered Tywin. He even shared a cup with Cersei, but behind his charm was calculation, and behind. The wine daggers brewed. That night Renly took Robert aside. No guards, no Lannisters, just two brothers under starlight. "You're not well, Robert," Renly said gently. "And when you're gone, the realm must know who holds true power." "So," Robert's hand tightened around his goblet. "So you want the throne?" Renly didn't blink. "I want peace, and Joffrey will not bring it." They parted with no resolution, but Tywin's spies were already listening. And when Robert returned to King's Landing, pale and silent, Tywin knew the time was near. He began making plans. Robert Baratheon would not see another winter. It happened not with a scream, but with silence. Robert Baratheon returned from Storm's End, changed. The laughter had drained from his eyes. The wine tasted bitter now, the hunt less thrilling. He rode slower, drank more, spoke less. Whatever had passed between him and Renly had shaken something deep inside. Or perhaps it had merely awakened a truth he had long refused to face. He was not the man he used to be. Not the king the realm needed. And perhaps never had been. Cersei watched him closely. She knew the signs. Robert had aged in weeks, not years. His body bloated, his steps unsteady. But what mattered more was that he had begun asking questions. He summoned Pycelle. At dawn. He wanted to know about his children, about their hair, their health. "They all look like her," he said, voice thick with suspicion. "Not a drop of my blood in them, all golden." Pycelle, feigning age and confusion, offered evasions, but Robert was not as dull as many thought. He'd noticed, and more than that, he remembered Jon Arryn's last words, "The seed is strong." That night, Robert confronted Cersei in her chambers. The doors were shut. The guards outside heard raised voices, something shattering, a growl of rage followed by silence. No one spoke of what happened within. But the next morning, Robert announced a royal hunt. "One last ride," he said, "just to clear his head." Cersei didn't stop him, nor did Tywin. The royal party set off with fewer guards than usual. Lancel Lannister rode at the king's side, pouring wine into his cup before every draw of the bow. By dusk on the second day, the king charged after a boar, alone as he always did. They found him the next morning, ripped open, his belly torn, his blood thick in the mud. He was still alive, barely. He was brought back to King's Landing, but his fate was sealed. In the darkness of his chambers, he beckoned for a quill. Cersei refused him audience. Pycelle dosed him with milk of the poppy. And Tywin Lannister forged the last will of Robert Baratheon, naming Joffrey as heir and himself, Tywin, as regent until the boy came of age. Ned Stark never saw the Raven coming. At Winterfell he received the news by sealed decree, not a letter from a friend but a royal order, cold and stamped with gold. His Grace King Robert Baratheon has passed. The heir, Joffrey of House Baratheon, sure sends, you are to remain in the north until called upon, by order of the hand of the king, Lord Tywin Lannister. Ned stood by the weirwood tree, staring at the parchment, the snow silent beneath his boots. Robert was dead, and the lion had claimed the throne. In the capital, banners were lowered, bells tolled, but there was no chaos, no riots. Tywin had prepared everything. He had pre-written decrees. Gold cloaks flooded the streets to ensure peace. The High Septon was summoned at dawn to bless the boy king. Joffrey stood before the Iron Throne, cloaked in red and gold, a crown too large on his head, a cruel smirk on his lips. His voice cracked as he swore the oaths. The court clapped. The small folk cheered. But those who knew better, they watched Tywin, not the boy. For it was Tywin who spoke through Joffrey, Tywin who held the realm in his calloused, ruthless hands. Renly fled the city that same night. Disgusted, furious, afraid. He rode fast and quiet to Highgarden, where Mace Tyrell welcomed him as a prince in waiting. The seeds of rebellion were already taking root. In Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon received the news last. He did not mourn. He clenched his jaw, turned to his maester, and uttered 4 words, "The throne is mine." Far across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen nursed her child beneath the stars. Viserys was gone. Khal Drogo rode at her side, and her dragons, yet unborn, whispered to her from the smoke of ancient dreams. In the dark tunnels beneath King's Landing, Varys watched as ravens were readied. His spies whispered that Tywin had orchestrated the hunt, that Lancel poisoned the wine, that Robert had died not from a boar but from betrayal. The spider only smiled. The game was truly on now. The realm bent beneath a crown forged in lies. With Robert Baratheon dead and Joffrey Baratheon crowned, by decree, the 7 kingdoms braced themselves, not for peace but for the slow, inevitable cracking of old alliances. For all of Tywin Lannister's meticulous planning, the realm was not made of parchment and gold. It was made of blood, and blood remembers. The North remembered first. Eddard Stark stood at the ramparts of Winterfell, the wind biting through his cloak. He had read and reread the royal decree, but the words refused to settle. He trusted his gut more than ink and wax, and his gut told him that something had gone terribly wrong. He wrote a letter, not to the crown but to Stannis Baratheon. In it he named what Jon Arryn had suspected, that Joffrey, Tommen and Myrcella bore no trace of Robert's blood, that they were Lannisters, born of incest, that the throne was not Joffrey's to sit on. He sent it with his most trusted rider along the narrowest paths south, but even as the rider left, Ned knew he might not live to see the storm he had invited. Tywin, ever watchful, had already begun cleansing the capital of dissent. Lords who whispered doubts about Joffrey's parentage were quietly discredited. One was found drowned in Blackwater Bay, another vanished en route to his keep. The silent threat was clear, loyalty or ruin. Cersei, now Queen Regent, stood taller than ever. She moved through court like a queen in truth, her golden-haired son on the throne, and her enemies reduced to shadows. But she knew her father still held the leash, and the child inside her, unplanned, unspoken, made her cautious. For the first time she feared Tywin more than she hated him, and Jaime, the Kingslayer, wore his white cloak with growing resentment, kept from Cersei, kept from power, kept from honor. He was a lion in a cage, pacing behind smiles and oaths. He began drinking more, sparring harder, and when Sir Barristan Selmy challenged him to a bout in the yard, Jaime lost and walked away bleeding. In the east, Daenerys Targaryen watched her newborn son grow strong beneath the endless sky. Rhaego, already broad-shouldered, was said to have the look of old Valyria. Khal Drogo was proud, but the Dothraki murmured of prophecy, of a child born beneath a red star, of a stallion who mounts the world, and beneath her tent, Daenerys placed 3 dragon eggs over a fire, whispering old words she did not yet understand. Magic was waking, slowly, reluctantly, but waking all the same. Back in the west, the Riverlands stirred. Catelyn Stark, having learned of Jon Arryn's death and Robert's fall, travelled to Riverrun with her sons. There Lord Hoster lay bedridden, but his bannermen listened. Catelyn spoke of betrayal, of Lannister corruption, of the threat looming over every honest house, and she wasn't alone. News had reached them. Tyrion Lannister was seen moving through the Vale, surrounded by sellswords and whispers. Lysa Arryn had refused to return to court. Her paranoia had turned to isolation. Her letters were unreadable, filled with accusations of poison and shadows. In the Reach, Renly Baratheon moved fast. With Mace Tyrell's support and the flowered banners of the South behind him, he declared himself the true king. "The realm needs joy, not cold justice," he said, "and I, not Stannis, have the love of the people." Loras Tyrell stood beside him, not only as a knight but as something more. Renly's move fractured the Baratheon legacy. Stannis responded with fire. At Dragonstone, a new priestess arrived, Melisandre of Ashai, cloaked in red, eyes like burning coals. She spoke of the Lord of Light, of the darkness to come, of kings chosen by flame. "You are Azor Ahai reborn," she told Stannis. "Only your fire can cleanse the false king's lies." And Stannis, grim and unloved, listened. The war had not yet begun, but the pieces were in place. Tywin Lannister, now the de facto ruler of Westeros, moved his armies into position. Gold fed every garrison, spies filled every keep, and letters were sent to Dorne to assure them of peace. But Doran Martell was silent, patient, watching. For even the sun burns slow before it strikes. The storm that Tywin thought he could control was gathering across every horizon. And not even all his wealth would be enough to buy back the silence. The realm was bleeding. It just hadn't noticed yet. The storm finally broke, not with the roar of dragons or the thunder of winter, but with a river soaked in blood. It began in the Riverlands. A small village loyal to House Tully was razed by a Lannister host under Sir Gregor Clegane's command. Tywin Lannister called it a preemptive response to rebellion. The village had no army, no banners, only farmers, children, and old men. Their screams were the first casualties of a war still being denied in letters. Catelyn Stark rode to Riverrun with Robb and a handful of northern bannermen. Her eyes no longer wept. They burned. She met with her uncle, Brynden Blackfish, Tully, and they agreed. Peace was no longer an option. Ravens flew from the north. Robb Stark called his banners. The north remembered. From the Dreadfort to Bear Island, from White Harbour to Last Hearth, the direwolf rose. Men sharpened blades. Old armour was pulled from chests. Boys kissed mothers goodbye. Winter wasn't coming. It was already here. Robb Stark, barely a man, found himself seated before the lords of the North and Riverlands. They looked to him for orders, for war, for vengeance. He had no crown. But he had something far rarer, loyalty, earned not through gold, but through bloodline, honour, and the name Stark. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Tywin's patience frayed. The North had moved. The Riverlands were resisting. Renly had declared himself king with Highgarden at his back, while Stannis, ever silent and grim, began building his fleet. Tywin could no longer play the calm regent. He had to become the warlord again. He summoned Jaime and gave him command of a host. Crush the Tullys. Burn the wolves' bridges before they cross them and make the boy Stark bleed. Jaime smiled. He lived for war. For a chance to be more than a whisper behind a queen's curtain. For glory that didn't taste like shame. He rode out at the head of 10,000 Lannister men, banners red and gold, armour gleaming like coin. and behind him came death. But Robb Stark was not his father. He didn't wait behind stone walls. He moved fast, splitting his host, tricking scouts, ambushing supply lines. His first major victory came at the Whispering Wood, where Jaime Lannister, golden and arrogant, was taken captive. The North erupted in cheers, and when news reached King's Landing that the Kingslayer had been caught, Tywin's hands curled to fists. That same night, a council of Northern lords shouted a name in unison: the King in the North. Robb Stark rose, not as a warden, not as a boy, but as a king reborn of Winterfell's ice and the blood of vengeance. Tywin had lost his best weapon, and Cersei? She panicked. Without Jaime, her power weakened, her temper sharpened. She clashed openly with her father, demanding he do more, threatening even to name herself Queen Regent in truth, not title. But Tywin was finished humoring her. "If you speak out of turn again, I will silence you in front of your son," he said coldly. "You are a womb, not a ruler." Cersei did not cry. She merely left, and that night whispered to Qyburn in the dungeons beneath the Red Keep. If her father would not protect her, she would find other monsters who would. In the south, Renly Baratheon's camp swelled. Knights of summer flocked to him. He was handsome, young, and beloved. He wore the crown well, but it was a fragile thing, for across Blackwater Bay a red comet streaked the sky, and on Dragonstone Melisandre lit the pyres high. Stannis stepped into the flames and emerged untouched. His men whispered he was chosen. That fire obeyed him, that the Lord of Light had granted him something more. With his new fleet and the blessing of a god few dared understand, Stannis set sail for King's Landing. The Game of Thrones was no longer a game. It was war. The false peace that Tywin Lannister had built with precision and blood was cracking under the weight of too many kings. 5 now laid claim to the throne, but it would not belong to all 5. It might not belong to any of them. And far to the east, beneath a rising moon, Daenerys Targaryen stepped into a fire with 3 dragon eggs clutched to her chest. At dawn, she walked out with fire breathing behind her. The world had changed, and the real war had only just begun. The war that Tywin Lannister had tried to manage with ledgers and threats was now roaring across the 7 kingdoms, with swords drawn and banners raised. And even he, the cold architect of order, could no longer stop what he had unleashed. The Riverlands burned. Despite Tywin's reinforcements, Robb Stark held the region with cunning and courage. Town by town, he outmaneuvered older, more seasoned generals. He freed Riverrun, held his line at the Twins, and now, with Jaime in chains, he held leverage that no amount of Lannister gold could buy. Tywin responded with brutality. He ordered Gregor Clegane to continue his campaign of terror, burning villages, salting fields, and hanging those suspected of sympathy for the North. He no longer pretended to rule justly. He ruled by fear now, openly, and made no apologies. And yet fear could not hold the throne. Stannis Baratheon's fleet arrived just before winter's breath truly touched King's Landing. His ships darkened the horizon. His soldiers, gaunt and grim, came not for glory, but for justice. His justice. He brought with him fire priests, red banners and a fanatic's resolve. Cersei had no love for her uncle Stannis, but even she feared what he had become. "He doesn't want to rule," she whispered to Joffrey. "He wants to burn us all clean." Tywin returned to the capital just in time to see its weakness. Joffrey had become unhinged without Jaime's presence. He beat servants, executed those who questioned him, humiliated Sansa Stark daily in court, as if hurting her could make Robb suffer. The people hated him, but feared the gold cloaks more. The city was a powder keg, and Cersei, pregnant and alone, grew ever more paranoid. Her father's scorn, her son's madness, her brother's absence, they made her reckless. She began stockpiling wildfire beneath the Red Keep just in case. Even the pyromancers grew nervous. Then Stannis struck. The Battle of Blackwater should have been a massacre. His fleet was larger, his men hungrier, his god more devout. But Tywin Lannister had sent ravens to a former enemy, House Tyrell. In exchange for Margaery's marriage to King Joffrey, the Tyrells brought their army to bear. Led by Sir Loras and backed by Randyll Tarly's brutal discipline, they rode hard for the capital. But even that wasn't enough. Tyrion Lannister. Denied any real power, defied both his father and sister by organizing the city's true defense. It was his plan that turned wildfire into a weapon, luring Stannis' ships into a trap and igniting the bay in green hellfire. Thousands died screaming. Stannis' fleet shattered. The city was saved. But the cost was unseen. Tyrion, wounded in the battle, was denied all glory. Cersei and Tywin saw to that. He was left in a dark room to rot, replaced by Lancel and sycophants. But the small folk remembered. Stannis escaped, dragging the remnants of his army to Dragonstone. Melisandre still whispered of prophecy, but her fire no longer felt like destiny. It felt like desperation. In the north, Robb's war slowed. The Freys demanded a wedding in exchange for safe passage, and Robb, foolishly, married for love. Tywin was patient. He waited. And then he struck. At the Red Wedding, Robb Stark, Catelyn, and hundreds of Northerners were slaughtered under guest rites. Tywin had orchestrated the betrayal through Walder Frey and Rose Bolton, buying their treachery with promises of lordships and lands. It wasn't a battle. It was an execution. When the news reached the north, it did not break them. It hardened them. Winterfell, burned by Ironborn and abandoned, became a rallying cry. Bastards and bannermen, wildlings and orphans, all began whispering one name, not of a king, but of a ghost. Jon Snow. Far to the east, Daenerys Targaryen marched through Slaver's Bay with her dragons grown large enough to burn armies. She freed cities, broke chains, and built a following not with coin, but with fire and blood. And across the Narrow, Ser Varys and Illyrio began moving their final piece. A young man with silver-gold hair and violet eyes, a boy they claimed was Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, saved from the mountain's wrath. Whether he was true or false didn't matter. He was not Joffrey. He was not Tywin, and people were ready for anything else. Tywin Lannister sat the small council one final time, older now, eyes heavier, but unbent. "We have peace," he said. Varys gave a soft smile. For now. But peace, built on betrayal, is only silence before the scream. And in the end, the scream always comes.